Hi everybody. In the previous video, we learned about models, how to create them and perform some basic tasks on them. In today's video, before we start the creation of our sign-in functionality, we would like to learn you the basics of HTML and CSS by adding our logo to our web pages. And we will learn how to use base templates to avoid we have to repeat this process for every page we ever create. When we started development, we were a bit discouraged by the idea that we have to learn all these extra languages. But very quickly, we found out it's nothing to worry about. HTML and CSS are so present online in the form of free snippets that you can almost design your whole website with parts of them. It's to you to decide what you give back. And with enough repetition, you will find yourself writing big chunks of design yourself and probably even enjoying this part. As always, open the command prompt and cd into your P1 folder. Start the virtual environment and cd into your project folder. Run the development server. And checking in the browser if our application still works. Works fine as expected. Now let's go to the editor. Go to your templates folder and create a new folder, base, in it. In this base folder, create a new file and save it as base.html. What we are doing here is simple. This base HTML file will serve as a template file for your homepage and about page, and for other pages which we will create in the future. And this base file will have a link to the CSS design file in our static folder. Let's create this file and save it as base.css. Let's repeat. The CSS file will be linked to the base.html file, which will serve as the base template for our homepage and about page. With this structure, the CSS code will be seen on all the web pages we assign to the base page. This to avoid having to repeat the code on each page. We will pause the video to add our code. Hold on. Back. With code and another color scheme. First, we'll show how an editor helps us. We remove this code and start typing the HTML tag. It gives a suggestion, and when we enter, it creates the basic template. And it will do so with all HTML tags. We will restore our code and explain what we did. First line is our Django static tag import, as we need it for our link to our base CSS file, which is located in the CSS folder in the static folder. See how easy we can link that? Next is a HTML requirement, and our HTML opening tag. This needs a closing tag. Inside we have our head tag, which needs a closing tag. Inside we put standard items, like a title, which needs a closing tag and which will be visible in the browser tab. And some HTML items for the language inputs and for mobile settings. We'll talk about mobile design later on. Here we also put all our links to our CSS files. For now we have only one. And the links to 2 fonts we want to use in our project. Free to use, thanks Google. And also a link to a library of icons. Free to use, thanks Font Awesome. And our last link is to get some CSS design kits, free to use, thanks Bootstrap. Later on we will add more links to providers of free stuff. You will see in a moment how easy it is to use it in your project. Now we come to the body of the HTML page, which needs a closing tag. Here an informational tag that we starting the logo section. It won't be visible in the browser, note the signs used. Here the first HTML div of our project, which needs a closing tag. The div is probably the most used HTML tag. It's a structural tag. It can be shaped, positioned, colored, in all kind of ways, both on the outside and the inside. We'll use it all the time. Don't confuse the class of an HTML tag with the class of models. It's just a way to give the div a name, so that we can refer to that name in the CSS file and give the div its design code. You will see in a moment how it works. Within the div tag, we added the ahref tag, as we want to link our logo to the homepage when it's clicked. We also gave the ahref tag a class name so that we can add design to it in our CSS file. Please note the span HTML tag. In contrast to diffs, span elements don't stack on top of each other, but remains on the same line. Handy to give parts of words another design. And another diff. Now comes the Django magic. The block content and end block. We will put these same tags also on our homepage and about page. In that way they will inherit all the code from our base template. The logo section. And the footer section. And all the HTML items, our CSS, the links. Again, every HTML page that we create and give a reference to the base template with the block content tags, will inherit all its code. You don't need to work with base templates, but it keeps things organized and clean. We also created a footer section. Same principles. Mainly diffs used, we gave them names by using classes, and these names we can access in our CSS file to add design code. Here you see the I tag, which is an icon from Font Awesome. So by adding the link to Font Awesome in our base template, we can use them wherever we want. It's wrapped in an ahref, as it will be the link to our sign up page. Done. Let's check the CSS file now. Note the structure of each element. We always have an opening and closing accolade. And a semicolon after each CSS statement. As the body is a main HTML element, we don't need to give it a class, we simply write its name in the CSS file with the accolades. For all other HTML tags, which we gave a class, we can simply access it by writing a dot and the name. Here are the class names in our HTML files. And we access them by writing a dot followed by their name and the accolades. And within the accolades, we write the CSS statement followed by a semicolon. Our logo was put inside a container, which we give a fixed position at the top, a width of 100%, the text inside will be centered and the background of the container will be transparent. For our logo, we chose a letter spacing, color, font and size, and some more. And when we hover the logo, it will change color. And it will do so in a slow motion way. Because we have set a transition time on the color of 1 second. Onto our footer. Basically the same process. Now a handy feature of CSS is that we can add design to element by naming the parent. The parent is the footer container and inside we have an I element. And in our CSS file, we can add design to the element by naming its parent before the element name itself. In that way, we have a class name less. We will do this mainly for the I element and the ahref element. The next block of design is for our homepage and about page. Note these informational tags to keep things structurized. As we want to wrap our homepage and about page in some design, we added HTML tag with classes to their templates so that we can add CSS here. Later on we will put it in a separate CSS file to keep our code manageable. Now let's have a look at the tags added in our homepage and about page. The first line is a Django tag. Mind the accolade and percentages. What this tag does is kind of self-explanatory. It tells the current HTML file to be an extension of the base.html file, which is located in the base folder. Next, we have our block content reference tag and the end content tag. With these tags, the page inherits all the code and links above and below the block tags in our base.html file. Django magic. We do the same in our about page. First the extension tag. Then the opening and closing content block tags. We wrapped our code in diffs and used classes to give them a name. And the closing tags. And very simple, we can access them in our CSS file, by writing a dot followed by their names and accolades. Again, the same structure and CSS statements. Truth be told, most of our CSS are snippets found online and changed to our preferences. Here we see the parent reference again. The input fields need a slightly other naming to access. Styling the placeholder of the input field. The input group text is a bootstrap class, which allows some overriding. And lastly, styling our button. Note that padding is the margin within the four sides of an element. When writing padding top below the full padding, it overwrites the top padding earlier defined. Same for margin, which is the margin on the outside of an element. And some box shadows, found online. And when the button is active, aka pushing it, we give it a small drop. Pause the video to go over the statements. Same for the HTML pages, pause the video and see how they're built. Now we have to add one more statement in the settings.py file. Just like we did for the templates folder. We also have to tell Django where to find the directory of our static folder in the operating system. Add this line of code. Done. Let's close this and go back. Don't forget to save your work. Now let's check in the browser how it looks. That looks better already. Let's check if our little application still works. An empty submit. Works. And typing something. Also works. And a page refresh while checking the color transition on the logo. All works fine. Link still okay. Let's go over the process one more time. We created a base HTML file in our base folder. The file contains all standard HTML that a web page should have. We have added our CSS link and free stuff links. We also have added a logo and footer. With the block content and end block, we can link as many pages to this base file, as long as we put the same block content tags on them. Now some HTML. The div is probably the most used element as it's very modifiable. By adding a class to it, we can give it a name. And because we have added a link to our CSS file, we can separate the design code from our HTML to make our project more manageable. Let's see the CSS file once more. You can access the element by writing a dot and its class name. The structure is always the same, accolades and CSS statements inside, each ending with semicolons. Some elements are accessed in a slightly different way. Note that the CSS file does not need to be separated. You can add the CSS on your HTML files between the style and its closing tag. But to keep your project organized, it's highly advisable to separate. And remember, there is nothing about HTML and CSS that you can't find online with a few simple searches. Now checking our web pages once more to see how they are linked to the base file. First the extension tag. And then the block content and its closing tag. Same on our About page. On these pages, we have also added a lot of HTML elements and gave them classes, which we then gave design in our CSS file by accessing their names. These input classes are bootstrap classes, helping us giving our input fields a slick design. And a Font Awesome icon. You can use both Bootstrap and Font Awesome by adding their library links, which we did in our base HTML file. Remember, you don't need to use base files. In our project, we could write all the HTML, all the links, the logo, the footer and even the CSS on our homepage.html file. And it still would work. Same for our About page. But you can imagine that it would become very messy, very fast. To end. In our future videos, we will mainly focus on functionalities, and not our HTML and CSS code used. When we put our project online, we will also post all the code. But for now, take the time to make sense of the process, and practice. This was it for today. Thanks for tuning in, and we hope to see you in the next video.